about Bitcoin and spirituality. So I got curious to speak to you a little bit deeper here on the podcast. So thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, happy to be here. This is stuff I love talking about.
Yeah, maybe we start with your spiritual journey. Did you take like psychedelics or something like some people do, or did you start meditating, or how did you get deeper into it?
Oh, I did do a bunch of psychedelics when I was, a teenager, but I'm not sure that had any effect. Probably the main thing that really upended my worldview and got me down the rabbit hole and all that was just getting sick. And it was, nothing like, cancer or anything too drastic, but it completely disrupted my life to the point where all the plans and things I was trying to do weren't going to work out anymore. And when I went just to get easy answer and a solution to the problem, there wasn't one. And so I was like, well, what the heck? What am I supposed to do here? Like, there's nobody who can help me, and this situation I'm in isn't working. And I think for a lot of people, that's fairly common to be in a very uncomfortable situation where you really have to start working outside the bounds of what's known, unless you want to stay stuck in that situation. So it got me into like, the alternative health thing and what's really going on. And I kind of had nothing to lose. And it's kind of a good place to be a lot of the time. And so I was willing to try anything, to get better, to be able to think clearly and function and all that stuff. And, now I think I'm doing better than ever. But I had to go through all that, and just going through it kind of opened my mind to stuff that I wouldn't even have considered, like when I was younger. All the weird esoteric stuff, and I'm open to all of it now. Like, literally nothing's off the table as far as what I would consider, because I've just seen too much weird stuff and, different types of knowledge that I wouldn't have considered. Now it just seems like, yeah, that could definitely be the case. So I think it's just getting uncomfortable is very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's a common path, like burnout or illness, stuff like this can really result in us having to reshape how we see reality. And like you say, when you come to this point that you have nothing to lose, it really makes you open-minded, and you can let go of all those beliefs that we got from society. And
Yeah, I mean, it's a gift, and I think a lot of people, myself included, think that we kind of choose our own experience here. We sort of map out how things are going to take shape. And, for me, it was definitely the type of thing that had to happen. Not that I was ever like a closed-minded thinker, but just to really, get into the realm of some of this stuff, you got to be willing to let go of all those concepts that are just given to you. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been kind of a crazy path, but I'm happy that it happened. It, wouldn't have gone any other way.
all right. And what about Bitcoin then? Did these come into your life before or after your spiritual breakthrough?
Yeah, after. So, even though I was kind of like feeling better, getting into more of the esoteric spiritual side of things, I wasn't like terribly enthusiastic about the future. I think like so many like pre-coiners and no coiners are, right. Like it's a lot of like doom and gloom. And I was definitely like, holy shit, look at all these things that are going on. It's all like pretty negative, pretty nasty when you focus on it. And that's all I was doing, was focusing on it. And so I probably had like a solid year of just like no hope, just kind of like trying to come to grips with the nature of the world that we live in. And so maybe 2 years ago ish, I stumbled across Bitcoin just randomly. And obviously, I just like everyone else, I'd heard about it years ago and just wrote it off, didn't think about it. And something just made me like stop and take notice. Uh, and when I did, I was like, it was just like a whole body experience, like energy just flowing through me. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? Like when I was younger, I wouldn't have noticed it, but just, just, just cursory looking into Bitcoin, I was like riveted to the spot, energy flowing. And I just could tell something was up with this thing. And the cliche, right? Bitcoin is hope. Like it became a huge part of my hope, and just the ability to think that the world can be drastically improved, and not in some far flung future, but in the near term. And like we can actually do it. I mean, it just became this like resounding, hopeful, positive message that I definitely latched onto. So yeah, that was about maybe a couple years ago now, year and a half. So it hasn't been that long, but I mean, it feels like my entire lifetime.
And did you start to connect the dots between spirituality and Bitcoin, or was it two separate topics in the beginning?
I think I did pretty much right away. Yeah, especially when I heard, like the origin story, Satoshi, all that kind of stuff. I was like, okay, I'm familiar enough with some of these ideas. And I was like, I think I see what's going on here. There is a lot of like darkness or negativity in the world, and there's things that are happening that are not so good, but it's counterbalanced, and there's forces that intervene for the light or for the good. And I was like, okay, well, Bitcoin is one of those things, and not just like a minor thing, but like a very major thing that was given to us for the purpose of rebalancing. And I think I kind of picked up on that right away. That's like what really drew me, because it was just it is this beautiful masterpiece of engineering, both, mechanical, digital, political, and psychological. The psychological component has really been on my mind lately, because I think it speaks to how do you re-engineer things, recreate things, without just doing it by fiat or force, or just burning it all down and trying to build something up. It's like you can do it in a way that's fairly seamless, and it's like drinking the top shelf gin or something. It's just smooth. People don't even realize that you've completely upended their concepts and their worldview, because the thing is so compelling. And that was a very like hopeful message as well with Bitcoin. It was like, yeah, fix the money, fix the world. You're gonna change all the stuff through changing the base layer, but it introduces the concept of being able to recreate everything, everything in a better way. Yeah, so I think I kind of linked those ideas together right away, and that's been kind of driving me forward.
So you say driving you forward. Can you describe how it has influenced your life, like your actions, and how you feel now that you can contribute to a better world?
Yeah, great question. I sent out this tweet, um, that the true something along the lines of the true innovation with Bitcoin was giving people access to a different jurisdiction. And what I mean by that is, like, my name on Twitter is Citizen of Satoshi. And so the idea is, I reside in the United States, in a state, in a, town, all that kind of stuff, all the way down. Um, but my higher jurisdiction is not bounded in the physical geography any longer, at least my mental conceptualization of it. Um, and so it's like, really, who has rights over this new currency that we call Bitcoin? Like, who really has authority over it? Um, I would argue, no one does, or some sort of spiritual governance at a higher level or a higher jurisdiction does. Um, but I think just like placing my mind there has been impactful. thinking along those lines, thinking of, okay, where does authority come from? Where does sovereignty come from? And everything we do is you're willingly accepting less. You're willingly accepting regulations and restraints through your own agreement to come down into those realms. But we don't have to. And that's been just a very like impactful idea in my own mind. And Bitcoin just kind of fits right in with that because I do think the higher jurisdiction is going to play a big role when this whole thing shakes out.
Yeah, that's really interesting and similar to how I also feel how I am a citizen of this of Earth or of Satoshi, like you say, or it's like a global community. And your question then, or your thinking was like, who is the ruler then? And since Bitcoin is decentralized, then everybody have sort of equal power. But if we look at what we are surrendering to, at least as spiritual Bitcoiners, then it is this. The other day, one friend said, the invisible hand. And I have this spirit or invisible hand that sort of holds everything in this invisible glue. And what I experienced the spiritual journey is like trying to be in sync with that. So abandoning or sacrificing or letting go of my own egoistic needs that I thought I needed, and then gradually coming into this state of flow where basically I'm just floating or flowing together with this invisible hand and letting my life and my actions be guided by this invisible hand. So if we come
Yeah.
into this like Bitcoin being decentralized and who's the authority, then it should be this invisible hand to be the authority. Can you agree with that, or does it resonate?
No, I totally agree. As I was kind of thinking about some of the things we may talk about tonight, that was on my list. And what I mean is, how do I say this? It's like, how like the Fibonacci sequence appears like everywhere, and we don't really understand why, but it just seems to be kind of baked into the cake of nature, you
Yep.
know?
Yeah.
I like what you said, the invisible hand, because I think that's like you see in the invisible hand at work. Like you don't see the hand, but you see the product of it. Like there's some sort of like beautiful symmetry or divine balance or something that's taking place, and it's manifesting in these ways. Like yeah, the way frequencies move and all that kind of stuff. But the point is with Bitcoin, it's like we're moving from this very discordant system that like works against nature. It's like anti nature, anti creativity, anti like you said, decentralization, communal effort. It's like a zero sum game, and we're moving to this thing where it's like aligned with nature, and it's much more powerful. It's like if you're looking at something like what Tesla was messing around with scalar technology, it's like you get this wave going in a direction. You just give it a little push and a little push, like a swing set. It doesn't take a lot of energy to move things great distances, let's say. And I just see Bitcoin as like that. Like we don't even realize what the possibilities are when we're working in harmony or in accordance with the laws of nature, this invisible hand giving us this push. It's gonna be, completely different. So I totally agree with what you're saying.
A spiritual journey is sort of when we get evidence of this hand, and then at first we become curious, start looking for it, start reading about it, start going to maybe people, teachers, and then slowly we start experiencing this invisible hand more and more in our life, and the process is just of leaving the old system behind. So the old system, fiat consciousness, I call it fiat consciousness. So it's, you can call it like fiat consciousness and then Bitcoin consciousness.
I
and
like
the
that.
Fiat consciousness is based on control. And we have all these aspects that we control in our lives. And those control patterns is what makes us sick, like you sick, probably. And it's like trying to control everything. And this is also what the World Banks and IMF, they are trying to control everything. So they are typical representations of the fiat consciousness. And then the bit consciousness, it's this led by the invisible hand, and everybody's moving through this journey of realizing our control patterns, because it's actually when we try to control things, that's when we get out of flow. That's when we get out of our spiritual truth, and we just start to be sort of manic, trying to control something. So it's like watching every person go through this process and watching the whole humanity going through this process.
Yep, it's going to be very interesting. I had another tweet, kind of what I would say along those lines is that something to the effect of the universe, like at its fundamental nature, is creativity. And that, you know, consciousness, identity, karma, these things are just manifestations of creativity, which is the fundamental force. It's, and by its very nature, prosaic and able to be manipulated and take any form. And, you know, it's like if you can put it in a box, it's always going to be temporary. You can, you know, the WF and all these people that want to box everything up and keep it static in the fiat consciousness, it's just an illusion, because it's all just underlying creativity. And we're all made of creativity, you could say, and it's like our true nature. It's our fundamental nature. And I totally agree. The Bitcoin consciousness just unlocks that. It's like, oh, we don't have to be stuck in these like rigid ways of thinking and doing things. We're much more in touch with that, like the way the actual universe is constituted. It's just pure creativity in my mind.
Yeah, good. So did you have anything else on the list? You mentioned you had a list what we could talk about today.
Yeah, one sort of idea I've been just kind of playing with in my own mind. It's, I don't know if I could even articulate it, but I could try. Is just this idea of Bitcoin as a god, which we could go into that if that sounds intriguing.
Yeah, sounds very good. I'm very interested in all your thoughts. Let's start with this.
Okay. I'll see what I can do. This is kind of at the limit of what I'm able to think about, but we'll try. So the start of this idea came from something Noam Chomsky said, which just completely captured my attention. He was talking about words, as he does, and he was saying, when you open a dictionary and you look up the definition of a word, you're not getting the definition. You're getting a hint, or a set of hints that in your mind will remind you of the definition of the word that you already know. And I had to kind of scratch my head on that for a second. It's like, what's he saying here? He's saying somehow we have these concepts and then we attach the word to it. And then we already know everything about that concept. And so he gives the example of like a river. And he's like, there's no way you can look up in the dictionary the definition of a river that would encompass everything about it. But you just know that concept. Like, you know, if the river starts flowing in the other direction, it's still a river, right? Like if you make the water purple, it's still a river. Like we know these things, we can play with the concepts, and yet nobody taught them to us, and you can't define them. So it's like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, what is this concept? Like, what is that? And I sort of started wandering into the thinking of this concept. It's like a living being. It's like a entity, or like an amalgamation of consciousness, let's say. And so if there were no rivers on this planet, we wouldn't use the concept of a river. It would still exist. It just wouldn't be manifest on this planet because, we'd just be like, what the hell are you talking about? What is that? But because we have them, it's like there's this channel or link through the etheric concept and the physical thing. So if we apply that idea to Bitcoin, it's like, we might think it's just, tens of thousands of nodes, all these miners and computers and, this ledger or whatever. But it sums up to this word or this concept called Bitcoin. And so now all of a sudden we were creating this channel between the physical world and this etheric concept. And so whatever that thing is, it's now here. It's like present in the world. And if we think of it as an amalgamation of consciousness, it's like we're channeling all new consciousness into this planet, maybe for the first time ever. If we've ever had Bitcoin before, I don't know. That's another conversation. But it's like it's here now. And so, some you know more about this than me, but some of the ways I think people meditate is like they'll focus on like a concept, forgiveness or compassion or love or whatever. And it's like your mind becomes one with that thing. You become the highest virtue of love or trust or something that you can conceptualize, and it's like you become that thing. I think a lot of that is going on with Bitcoiners, and they don't even realize it to a large extent. It's like, we're in the spaces chatting about it. We're like tweeting, we're running nodes, like whatever. It's like your mind is like fused now with this greater thing. And by doing that, you're enlarging, is that a word? You're making your own mind bigger and more powerful and bringing this new concept into being. So I can stop there. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, very interesting. I have a lot of thoughts about this. So actually, the name of my podcast, Bitcoin Consciousness, it sort of refers to, at least sometimes, to this consciousness around Bitcoin. And then when you become a Bitcoiner, you connect with this consciousness. So it's like a group mind or a mastermind or whatever you want to call it. And that is what I call a consciousness. So it's like a radio channel or whatever you want to say. And then when you become a Bitcoiner, you dial into that channel, and you can sort of adapt beliefs and you adapt behaviors from being part of that consciousness, because you're tapped into it. And some people are tapped into it more than others. And then we have all these different subgroup minds, where some are more, you have the developers, then you have the people who only eat meat, and it's all these different subdivisions of this big Bitcoin consciousness. This is along the same lines that you were thinking, right?
Very much so. Yeah, I like that a lot too. Those kind of subdivisions, and it's so interesting because I've never met a group of people where it's like they might one's Jewish, one's Christian, one's whatever, and it's like it doesn't matter. Like I'll hear out what they have to say with like no emotional reaction. It's like, oh, okay, cool, but you're a Bitcoiner, like awesome. It's like that higher consciousness that's not subdivided. It's like that's the most important thing. But then you do get into these subdivision things, and the crazy thing about Bitcoin, it's opened my mind, and I thought I was fairly open minded, but it's opened my mind to like all kinds of stuff that like I wouldn't have even considered. It's just endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, so I also been going through, because I was connected to many spiritual group minds and consciousness, right? So, and I've been connected to like alien people or conspiracy theories people, and so I've been involved with all of these different sub consciousness. and then coming into the Bitcoin consciousness and merging these, they sort of mix in my body or in my energy body
Mhm.
as being inspired. So I agree. It's many things, especially individual sovereignty and these kind of personal power. And I really like this don't trust, verify. So it's so many things from the Bitcoin consciousness that the spiritual consciousness can really learn from, because the spiritual consciousness is often more like etheric and more like belonging together. And since I became a Bitcoiner, it's more like, yeah, we are all together, but it's me in my energy body, and it's other people in their energy bodies, and we shouldn't sort of mix and mingle too much, because then we don't stay true to our truest self if we start to compromise too much.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and that's another very interesting concept. To me, it's the difference between being with your ego versus being with your identity. And to me, the fiat consciousness almost has to imply ego, a sense of separation, division between people, versus the Bitcoin consciousness lets people have an identity, which means like, we're united on this thing, but I'm me and you're you. And, I have a semi permeable membrane around me. Come in, or these various things come in, others can't. And that's healthy in my mind. Everyone needs to have a healthy identity versus, just acting completely out of ego. No ego, identity good. And yeah, like what you're saying, it's all these things are kind of mingling and letting them come together, and people can actually like create who they want to be versus just having it kind of foisted on them. And then, acting out of ego, that's no good. You don't really get to decide who you are. So yeah. So the other thing about, this idea of Bitcoin as the God, right? It's like, um, say we pass away, and then maybe we'll come back, this lifetime and do it again and again. Um, but at some point, I think you stop coming back. Like you've had enough of the 3D world, and so you just kind of live in the etheric plane, or whatever. And but after a while, like what happens to you? Where does it's like, what does your identity look like if you're Buddha now, right? Like Buddha in the body and the person, like we kind of have an idea what that was like, but what is your identity like when you kind of become like that guy? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I like where this is going. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's like that identity, it's like you're saying, I'm me, I'm Sam in my energy body and all that kind of stuff. But at some point you become vastly more expansive. um it's like you're Buddha in the sense that like we know him, but you're also like more than that. It's like you're starting to like incorporate concepts into your identity. You actually start to like become let's say patience or compassion, like these kind of virtues start to like get folded up into like who you actually are. And then I think if you keep going with that, at some point you're no longer any sort of recognizable identity. Like a mind becomes so refined, it actually becomes that thing. And so I usually kind of put, the virtues like in this conceptual idea here, right? Like you can refine your mind to the point where like you are pure compassion or love or whatever. But I also put Bitcoin into that. It's like all of the higher level concepts that Bitcoin represents, that we're still even now just starting to figure out. it's like your identity can become so expansive that you become Bitcoin, which sounds kind of weird. Um, which implies that there was already some evolved mind that created this concept, and all we're doing is merely inviting that being to play around on this planet for a while.
Yeah. So if we go back a little bit to where you started, so when something comes in to humanity, is it because we create it as a human from our mind? Or I've started to see it more the other way around, that this we are moving into higher frequencies as humanity and as people. And then it's like when we reached a certain point, then we invented LSD in computers. And then the consciousness continued to rise on the planet, and we invented internet. And then consciousness continued to rise. We invented Bitcoin. And God knows what's next, right? So it's just like we are able to tap into these higher consciousness. And so rather than we are like cavemen trying to figure things up, it's like it's the evolution of consciousness is influencing us as we go on the evolution of this planet. And so ideas, concepts just becomes available to us when we are ready for it.
Yeah, I like that, the way you put that, definitely. Um, in my opinion, it's like a push and pull between, or what you might call like the light workers and the dark workers, or I don't know, but the good and the bad, let's say. And then you kind of have this like the vast majority of people just sort of sitting in the middle, and they can be pushed or pulled in either direction. Yeah, so I do agree with what you're saying. It's like the consciousness has to be a certain way to let this other concept come in. Um, and so that's technological. Like we actually need computers for this thing to be a thing. But yeah, the consciousness has to be a certain state. And so it's like a feedback loop, in my opinion. Like those people who are just kind of in the middle, like their concepts are just created for them. They don't necessarily think outside the box too much, which it's fine. Once Bitcoin becomes a thing, it's like they're pulled along in that direction now, into the direction of like higher consciousness. And then as they are, it changes the vibe or the frequencies to allow, like you said, who knows what could happen after that, like new stuff to come in beyond that. And it just kind of keeps feeding into itself. I think it's the natural evolution of any species, any planet. And so the beings here who are trying to thwart that or send it in the opposite direction, it's like it's kind of doomed to failure. They can stop it temporarily, um, or maybe even for a long time, but ultimately it's just a positive feedback loop to evolution.
Yeah, and to tie this back to your idea of a god, did I understand you correctly, like that Buddha, for example, he could maybe incarnate as Bitcoin, or similar like the mycelial network is it's a consciousness, it's sort of a person, right? So it's like when you evolve and you finished with a human experience, you done it, like you said, and they want to try new things. And the physical realm is like where we try out stuff, because outside time and space, it's not much room for growth, because you can't really move so much, and because there's no space, and you can't grow because you don't have time. So it's like the whole plan of the creation is that you go down to the physical world in time and space, and there you expand and grow and explore and have fun and so on. So I haven't thought about that before, I think, but so Buddha sort of, oh, what should I do now? I can incarnate as a digital monetary network, and then he sort of go to the mother Satoshi Nakamoto and come agree with him. Can I come into your womb and be born through you? Is this sort of how you imagine it?
Yeah, I like the way you put that. It's a little maybe a little different than what I was saying, kind of, but it's pretty much spot on. I like what you're saying. Yeah, I never linked that kind of the idea of the mushroom network in that same type of way. But yeah, it's just we kind of get stuck in this box of thinking about, I'm a person with a mind and like, you know, these thoughts and the will and all that stuff that goes with it. It's hard to imagine what like a really higher, different type of consciousness could be. It could be a mycelial network or a Bitcoin network, like why not? That could be someone's identity. It's just very different than what we're used to. One thing I mentioned.
Everything is consciousness. So
Right.
it's if it's consciousness, it's the same as us. We are a type of consciousness. Bitcoin is a type of consciousness. Everything is. It's just an essence, right? So.
Yeah. And one of the things I mentioned before is that we are in this kind of unique time with the precession of the equinoxes. If you've heard of that whole thing, we're moving from one age into the other. And from what I can tell, these ages or times of flux, energy, new things can kind of come in. It's like the doors are open and, jump on in while the door's open. And so previously, the ages were defined. I can't remember the one before Pisces, but that one was defined by Buddha and what his consciousness represented, you could say. And then the Pisces was defined by Jesus and what his consciousness represented. I personally think the age of Aquarius that we're moving into is going to be defined by the consciousness of Bitcoin. And so that was intentional. That was like, okay, guys, like, Earth, we've been working on them for 200 years, moving these bastards along. They're ready for this. The door's open, get in there and let's make this happen. So when I started thinking about it along those lines, like this is kind of like once in 2,000 year event.
Yeah, I've had those thoughts also. And actually, that's another angle for the name of my podcast, because, Christ consciousness is it's a very popular term in New Age. So Christ consciousness is basically means that you achieve similar levels as Jesus. So he was this front runner, and he basically set the level that is possible in that age. And then people had the option to do that if they sort of followed what he said, or and then now Bitcoin consciousness, I think, can set an even higher level for the next age. So Christ consciousness, we can say that this was, like 200 on whatever scale. And now Bitcoin comes in, because I feel Bitcoin to be a really, really high consciousness. It's really like this truth, transparency, and true decentralization embodied. It's like, so it's for a person, it's not possible to be that high consciousness at this time. So it was created, and now it's like if Jesus was 200 and Bitcoin is now 300, and setting the stage for the next era. So sort of showing us, this is what's possible. Here you go. Take on the challenge. Let's go.
I love that. Yeah, I think we're definitely in agreement on that. And the idea of setting the level is very interesting. It's so masterful to me. It's just like, when Jesus is walking on water and doing miracles and the Kundalini's flowing, everyone's like, yeah, let's get behind this dude. But when he goes away, what happens? It gets turned into this religious, mess of control, and people just get like a little glimpse of what it was, and they try to latch onto that and achieve his state of mind. Like, it doesn't work for the vast majority of people. I believe in the way that Jesus would have wanted it to. But the fucking thing about Bitcoin, it's like it's just so subtle. It slips into your life, you're and I'm thinking down the road, right? Like in the future, we're transacting in it. It's making everyone wealthy. It's, causing this like deflationary revolution. And like, it's just like, there's no reason not to use it versus like you'd have to go seek out Christianity or some of the other religious type things and like work at it. And not that there's not work involved with Bitcoin. It's just like it's like work you want to do. I don't know. I've it's just amazing to me. It's like decentralized spirituality.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that the Christianity, it's like a altcoin compared to actual Jesus, you know. And in this age, we can actually access, I hope, Bitcoin directly or a Lightning network, you know. So we will be interacting with this very, very high frequency daily in the future.
Right. Yeah,
And
it's like having like what's that song, Personal Jesus? It's like having your own personal Jesus, like everywhere you go, any on call anytime you want to use it. That energy, it's like on tap.
yeah, it's similar to every church having a priest, and all the priests would be the same level as Jesus was. You know, that would be, then you would
Excellent.
be happy to go to the church. But that has not been the case. It's rather opposite. It's been turned into control and brainwashing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we need to be on guard. I mean, I think that almost goes without saying that it will try to be corrupted and that energy will try to be harvested for negative means. It's so much more difficult. It, you know, you can just imagine, right? Like the meeting that went on around the big round golden table, right? Like they're all like, okay, what are we going to do to set these guys straight in the year 2000? And they're just cooking this thing up, engineering it. It's just got like masterful fingerprints all over it of all kinds of different minds, the way I see it. So I have a question for you. Is
Mm-hmm.
have we ever had Bitcoin before, either on this planet or other planets, or something, maybe it's called something else with the different coin supply cap, but have we ever had this before? Or is this like a new thing?
Interesting question. Uh, First thought is that I have no idea, but the thing is that this physical density, from my experience, from my understanding, we have never achieved mastery of this density. But you know, the creation is in many, many different densities from pure source, and then it goes more and more and more dense down the dimensions. So aliens, for example, they live in higher densities and in a different dimension. And I think they probably had something like, I don't know, but I can imagine, because some alien civilizations, they're like really advanced, but it's because they're also on a higher frequency. So they are more into unity, peace, and all these things. They have these values. And then they could create something like that because they're not in duality in that same. So they just have a currency. It doesn't even have to be decentralized there because it's just natural. Everyone sort of just knows what everyone is doing. It's just transparency, right?
Mm.
So everybody can feel what everyone else is feeling. So, but here in the physical realm, we have never been able to find harmony from what I have seen. I mean, you have Atlantis, but it was a huge war and it's just destruction, and the same in Lemuria. So this time we are trying to do it the right way. We're trying to sort of crack this nut for a long time, and I think Bitcoin will be the key to do this properly, because the Atlantis was brought down by control patterns, right? And this is
Mm.
what happens. Bitcoin is melting these control patterns. Does this answer your question in any way?
Yes, it does. You're giving me some thoughts here because it's like at least from what I know about Atlantis, it was like managing the duality. It was like, okay, we're kind of stuck with this density, like you're saying. What can we do with it? And it was like, we'll try to like manage it. And I think they were very successful for a long time, but ultimately it didn't work out. And it's like Bitcoin wants to like integrate the duality. And I guess what I mean by duality, it's like selfless versus selfish behavior. People who want to act in either of those dualities, polarities, I guess you'd maybe say. Like in Atlantis, it was sort of like it was like known that you were acting in one of those, and there wasn't a lot of like judgment about it, and it was just sort of like managed. But Bitcoin, it's like integrated because your selfish desires are my selfless gains, something like that. Um, and the other thought I had while you were saying that, it's like I've had this in my mind for a while now that like awareness is the ultimate currency. And so we had this fiat or analog currency for a long time, you know, forever. And then we're moving into this digital currency, Bitcoin. But ultimately, it's just a bridge to like a pure consciousness based currency. Probably like what you're talking about, these higher dimensions with aliens, other beings. It's like the consciousness or the currency is consciousness. It's just awareness. And like, how do you get there? How do you manage this density and get people into that state of mind where they realize like your focused attention is the most important thing. It's the most valuable energy in the history of the universe. You don't just get them there with like some spiritual woo woo talk. It's like you got to give them some Bitcoin, get them lubed up with that for like 300 years, and then maybe you can transition into a consciousness based currency. That's kind of the way I see it.
Interesting. Yeah, I think, Jesus and Buddha, these guys, they introduced the non-duality concepts on Earth. So like you say, like back in Atlantis and so on, they were still trying to deal with this light and dark and all these things. And they had to take different sides. And then Buddha and Jesus comes along and saying, if you just harmonize these two opposites inside of you, you don't have to take a side anymore. You can still be in a human body, but you don't have to take a side. And then, of course, people misunderstood this for a long time. And now Bitcoin comes along to really show this even more clearly, that it's just an illusion. Duality is just an illusion. And if we would mess this up now, if Bitcoin will go through the same Jesus story, then it will be like a central bank currency, and they would just put like Bitcoin on a cross, and then just say, "Oh, Bitcoin is our savior," and they would then feed this centralized currency to all the people and have them monitored, and it's very similar if that would happen.
Yeah, that's great. Uh, yeah, I totally agree. That's very interesting. I've never thought about it like that. That was maybe the introduction of this systematic type way to get out of duality internally, and then we're giving people, well, not we, but whoever gave us Bitcoin, they're giving humanity the way to do that. At like a base reality is going to be almost non-dualistic. I mean, it's hard overstate the power of rewiring someone's perceptual layer of the world. All the things that we just see and don't think about what we're seeing and experiencing, it's all getting rewired at that level. I mean, it's just like it's so profound because we do that show pretty much on Sundays, the Starseed Showdown show. And one of the concepts that keeps coming up is it's very, very, it probably is the most difficult thing in the world to change someone else's mind. Like, I don't think there's anything more difficult to somebody has a concept in their head about what things are, what they should be, and you want to go and like ruffle that up and change it around. It's like they're going to fight you tooth and nail because nobody likes that. And the thing about Bitcoin, it's like, I don't know, it's hard to even like express how it's doing it, but it's just reorienting people's perceptions, and they're just like willing to let it come in and do it. You see this on Twitter all the time, people talking about how Bitcoin changed their lives and all this stuff. It's just like, yes, please come in and rewire all of my perceptions and, preconceptions and biases and concepts. People just invite it in and let it do this, whatever, uh, defragmenting the hard drive. People still do that. It's like,
Yeah,
it's amazing.
yeah. I want to come back to this, what you said before about awareness and value. And when we start directing our focus inwards, like in the beginning of our journey, we think that our problems are outside. We think that the people in our life cause our problems, right? And then we figure out, the programs are in me. So we start changing our programs. We start melting our programs, right? And then the problems disappear. And we start to understand its logic of our inner programming versus our external feedback loop. So we make changes inside and then watch them change on the outside. And when we do this more and more, this is what Buddha did, for example, right? And then it's just, we are able to refine the programs in our energy body more and more and more. And the external experience becomes better and better and better. So that our awareness has value becomes a natural part of this, because when we realize, how can I change more of my programs even faster? And the key is awareness, right? Because if I'm more aware of how I act and where those programs are in my energy body, then I'm able to see where it is. I can solve that wound faster, and my external reality becomes better faster. So I think it's just when we're still in a victim consciousness of feeling the external world is against us,
Yeah.
then we think money, we think dollars is its value. But as soon as we start turning it around and we see the external reality, it's just my feedback loop, and the external reality is working together with me for me to find my weaknesses and for me to find where I'm hurt in the past and to be able to solve that. It's all about awareness. And awareness becomes the most sought after commodity.
Mm-hmm. That's such an amazing point. Seriously, really good, because I think most everyone starts out that way. And it's just baby mind thinking that, this happened to me and I'm a victim of circumstances. There really aren't, unfortunately, any victims. Maybe fortunately, depending on how you look at that. There are no victims, and we create all of our experiences. And if it doesn't make sense to someone, they just maybe need to spend more time trying to figure out how that thing came about. And I'm a big fan of a woman named Louise Hay, and I think if I had to distill down her philosophy, she says whatever you focus on increases, or kind of like what you're saying, wherever you place your awareness, that becomes your external circumstance. And so by focusing on being the victim, you actually create more circumstances where you're the victim. And it's just amazing to me how much this is played up in our society, even more so lately, because it is the most valuable commodity and people want to harvest that from us. And if you're not careful, it'll be directed in somebody else's agenda. And I'm not exactly sure the connection, but I know Bitcoin has a role to play in teaching people how to champion their own awareness.
Yeah, and if you look at Jesus and Buddha, that's the only thing they had. awareness. And when they had that, they don't need so much more. It's awareness.
So it sounds like you kind of came in through the spiritual side of things. So I'm curious how much success you've had talking to other, let's say, spiritual minded people about Bitcoin. And if you did have success, like what do you tell them? Like what is the hook that gets someone like that interested?
Now, yeah, it's been difficult. It's been very interesting to see how someone I thought of as very spiritual, but then how they start defending their spirituality rather than being open-minded for something like Bitcoin. And then it's like, is this even spiritual? Then it's more like a club that you belong to, and it's like beliefs that you feel comfortable with, and you're not able to think outside of those So it's been a journey, and I can't say really. It's like when you try to convince someone, it doesn't work anyway. Like you said before, it's like this duality thing, right? When you try to push something, it only grows in them. So it's something more that people have to figure out by themselves.
Yeah, it's yeah, I could just imagine you maybe heard inklings of Jesus or you've never met the dude and then you like shake his hand or something. You'd probably be like blown away. You'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I got to like listen to this dude. I got to, follow his teachings, whatever." Like I felt like that when I first really started looking into Bitcoin. It was like shaking hands with Jesus. And I was just like, "Okay, what is this? I got to figure this out. I need to, get into it." And, to be fair, I still, even with that type of experience, I was still looking at other shit coins and, I wasn't really clear the difference, but I knew there was some crazy energy behind this thing. And I try to tell other, spiritual type people, just go meditate on it. Like go intuitively ask yourself, like, what is this? What does it feel like?
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes it kind of works, but yeah, for the most part it doesn't, which sort of makes me think kind of what you're saying, like what is this person's mind really about? Like are they just joining the spirituality club, the after school programs? Like it's maybe not like a real just open mind expansive type thing, but I do think there is the inroads from that type of community into Bitcoin. It just needs to be presented optimally to them.
Yeah, for me, I started to see spiritual people similar like other people. If for me, it's not so much of a difference anymore. It's just everyone has these needs, right? Unmet needs because of faulty programs, bad programs. So they have bad programs and they're searching for relief from the outside. Even if they talk about spiritual concepts, they still cling to different religious ideas and so on. And this is where Bitcoin consciousness comes in really with this don't trust, verify, and individual sovereignty and standing in your own. Because many, what people call spiritual, is like they're just entering higher consciousness, but they're not entering their own personal assets. And I think this
Mm-hmm.
is the problem. And so I say, connect with your inner node, right? So I see that everyone has their own unique connection directly to the creator network, similar like the Bitcoin network. And it's just spiritual people, it's like they connect to higher consciousness, like other people's nodes.
Yeah, they
It's like
outsource. Right. Yeah.
teachers' nodes and books nodes. So, yeah, I believe this or I belong to this. So it's like they connect with other people's nodes rather than their own node. And then Bitcoin is like, no way, no way. It's like I have my own, and then this is it. and I can get all the information, all the knowledge I need from my node. And it's like you can really verify things for yourself, because the base layer of reality is the same for everyone. Then everything else is just different interpretations, right? So if someone says something, we can just check this in our own connection. We go inwards and we check with ourselves. Does this resonate with our truest core or not? And if we don't do that, then we're just followers. So people are followers of government, or people are followers of religions, or people are followers of spirituality of various kinds. So it's just this, are people followers or not? And Bitcoiners come in like showing the way here, that you can't be a follower and just repeat spiritual concepts all day. It's about really taking ownership of your own node and your own piece of the creator network, right?
Such a great analogy. That's so spot on. And I see some Bitcoiners on Twitter shit posting, and I'm like, this dude is more spiritual than anyone I know. You know, they don't even realize it. They're just talking shit about either or something. But it's that sovereign inner node mindset of, you know, I'm just gonna go in and access this source energy and make my own plans in life, come up with my own information and how I want to see the world. And it's so appealing. It's like, you know, if you're running your own node and you meet someone else who's also running their own inner node, it's very um peaceful. And yeah, most people just want to log in on the teacher's node and download their, you know, ledger. But yeah, and that's
But
fine. You know, I don't know that that ever changes fully, even with the hyper Bitcoinized world. I don't know that it ever does. Meaning, I don't know everyone becomes, you know, that much closer to enlightenment. I just think that's part of the playground of this world that we're in.
well, I see this transition. The first step of Bitcoiners is to become individual thinkers. So this means that they start thinking first. This is within the mind, right? So I see the mind is separate from the soul or the node. So first stage of Bitcoinery is that you become an independent thinker. Like every thought that you believe, you think about it more times from all different directions, and you think, is this what I want to think? But then, as they do this, they come closer and closer to the truth, because that's their focus. And then this other area open up, the spiritual realm, and that's their soul. So when they switch from the left brain with their logic, and they start feeling like, don't trust, verify, don't trust, verify. Okay, let's go to another level, and I will feel. Well, how do I feel about this? That's intuition, right? So start using the intuition. So this is what I see with the Bitcoiners, that they go through the mind first, and then when they sort of reach the limitations of the mind, because they know that everything in the mind is just models. It's actually never the truth, because it's just models. So then they sort of forced into the intuitive mind and start feeling and sensing and experiencing. And that's when they connect to their own node and start getting their own connection to the truth network.
Yeah, and if you think about, if you had designs on creating a religion, and I think Jesus is on record saying, like, I didn't want to make a religion. That was my plan. But like, if you wanted to, it would almost invariably have to be decentralized, because not everyone can connect to the Jesus node. Like, I think that's why that term Christ consciousness you mentioned before maybe is a little, oh, there's something wrong with it, because it's not like you're connecting to Jesus's node. You're connecting to the same node you have within you that he did. It's just yours. And so it is like a decentralized religion. Spirituality is probably a better way of putting it. But that's the whole point of things, is to get people to use their own intuition. Like, I think it's maybe the most efficient way to level up consciousness, and it's so denigrated in this world. So this is just part of the whole plan to bring that back up for people. I think get them using their intuition again.
Yeah. So where can people find you and your ideas?
Twitter's probably the main place. If I have a thought, I just put it out on Twitter. But we also I host a show, another Twitter fellow named Avogades and Cosmic Soul Poet. We do a show on Twitter pretty much every Sunday called Starseed Showdown. And we have a guest, and we usually interview him on the show for, a couple hours, something like that. And, after talking with you tonight, it would actually be great to have you come on the show sometime if you're interested.
No, that would be cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we get, pretty deep on various topics and, not just Bitcoin, but all kinds of stuff. And, if I had to like leave people with a thought, it's possible to build a real utopia as opposed to like a fake one, or to like take the reins of the consciousness that we have here and actually level it up, bring it to the place we want to be. Like what is Bitcoin? It's really just some code. It's not, we see it now in this great architecture that's only getting more and more complex and distributed, but at its heart, it's just some code. And all of the ways that we have, in my opinion, problems, with like healthcare and education, politics, military, you name it. It can all be easily recreated with creativity. And we can actually do it. Like I've been just completely captivated by the idea that we can take the model of what Satoshi did in Bitcoin and apply it in other areas. I don't know exactly how or what that looks like, but I'm convinced it's possible, and I'm convinced it's going to happen. And we're going to have, little Bitcoins and all these other things that we do, sending our kids to school, and how we participate in civics and government and everything. It's all going to be the same type of consciousness integrated into all these systems. And I think it'd be nice if people could start thinking about that to some extent and sort of generate that energy, because I'm not sure we're going to get another, Satoshi alien enlightened being down here to do it for us. But we can do it. It just needs a little bit of thinking. And now's the time, because everything's in flux, and that's when new ideas can take root. So I've never been more optimistic and excited in my entire life.
Yeah, well said. It's as long as we have Bitcoin as this true decentralized foundation layer of society, then we can create, like you said, decentralization everywhere. And they don't have to be so heavily guarded as Bitcoin. They can just be more sort of centralized versions, but in a decentralized way, because Bitcoin is sort of holding the ground or holding the level. So everything built on top of it, from it, will have this decentralization in it automatically. I just got those visions now when you were talking. But thank you very much for taking your time and coming on the podcast. And let's move forward into the bright future together.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the plan. Keep spreading the word and doing what you're doing, and hope to chat with you again soon.